Banks. The Longhorns came into the weekend with the 65th best recruiting class. They left the weekend with the 56th best recruiting class. So I'm fully convinced that now they'll end up with the best recruiting class of all time. That's the Kool-Aid. Hook 'em.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, recruiting is fun on the 40 acres again. We brought in 2 commits over the weekend. We discussed that. Plus, we discussed what's next for Steve Sarkisian and his staff as they look to fill out this 2024 recruiting class. And last but not least, Steve Sarkisian and his staff aren't the only people on the 40 acres recruiting. Rodney Terry may have struck again. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we get into the subject matter, I just want to thank everybody for 3,000 YouTube subscribers. Definitely was able to celebrate that this weekend. Now we are on the path to 4,000. The grind never stops. So if you enjoy the show, please subscribe, please like. Thank you for your support. So we're talking about recruiting on the 40. And they had the official visit weekend this past weekend, and everything I've read, everything I've heard would tell me that it was a really successful weekend, and they did a really good job with over 20 official visitors on the 40 acres this weekend. I want to give credit to everybody involved, right? I want to give credit to the University of Texas for hosting such a great event. I want to give credit to our recruiting staff who works tirelessly all year to make sure that these recruits have a great time and they represent the University of Texas in the best way possible to these recruits and their families. I want to give credit to Steve Sarkisian and his staff. They've done a really good job recruiting and developing, I feel like, over the last 3 years. And that was evidenced this weekend with 2 more commits came to the University of Texas. And I want to give credit to the football players, right? They do a really good job on these official visit weekends and, kind of giving the player perspective to these young recruits and, recruit players at times that are going to come in their room and possibly try to take their spots, So I think the players do a really good job of helping the staff recruit. And like I said, it landed in 2 commitments this weekend and a lot more coming soon for your favorite football team. Starting with Santana Wilson, he was the first to commit this weekend, a 6-foot, 180-pound corner from Scottsdale, Arizona. And he's the son of former All-Pro safety, 5-time Pro Bowl safety, Adrian Wilson, who played for the Cardinals from 2001 to 2012, is in the Cardinals Ring of Honor, retired in 2014 overall. And this just told me how old I am, or I'm getting old. I've told y'all I'll turn 30 on September 16th. I feel a little bit older than that right now because I remember as a young Cowboy fan growing up, and one of my favorite teams that I didn't necessarily root for, but I always checked in on was the Arizona Cardinals team with Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Bolden, Kurt Warner was the quarterback. And I remember on defense, they had Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie and Adrian Wilson as safety. And I really loved that team. I was rooting for them in the Super Bowl. Didn't want the Steelers to win. Ben Roethlisberger made one of the craziest throws you'll ever see to Santonio Holmes in the back of the end zone. But yeah, I really loved that team. So I used to root for Adrian Wilson a lot, right, on that Cardinals team. And it's crazy now I'll be rooting for his son playing at the 40 acres. And Adrian Wilson, who played against Eli Manning and Peyton Manning, they'll now all be on the sidelines or in a box rooting for their son or their nephew at the 40 acres at the same time when they competed against each other at the highest level in the NFL. That's crazy to me. And not only is he a former football player in Adrian Wilson, but he's the current VP of player personnel for the Panthers. So really the majority of Santana Wilson's life, if not his whole life, he's been around the NFL. I think that would only benefit him in terms of being a high school football player, a college player at Texas, and hopefully in the National Football League in the future. When you look at his high school career, the last 2 seasons, Santana Wilson had 91 tackles, 6 interceptions, and 2 defensive touchdowns. He's looking to expand on that his senior year. I'm just going to say this really quickly. If I accidentally call him Carlos Santana at some point, please forgive me because that's all that's on my mind. I'm trying so hard not to say Carlos Santana right now, but I feel like it's going to slip out at some point. So if it does, just charge it to my head, not my heart, right? Like I said, the last 2 seasons, Wilson had 91 tackles, 6 interceptions, and 2 defensive touchdowns, looking to expand on that his senior year in 2023. And what's interesting about Santana Wilson, I almost said it just now, is that On3 has him ranked significantly higher than the other recruiting sites, right? On3 has Santana as the 13th best corner and 90th overall player in the country. When you look at 24/7 Sports, they have him as the 35th best corner in the country compared to 13 from On3. ESPN and Rivals both have him as the 46th best corner in the country compared to 13th from On3. If you remember, On3 was the only recruiting site that had Xavier Worthy as a 5-star coming out of high school. And I think he's more than lived up to that 5-star status at the University of Texas. So hopefully for our sake, On3 got it right again. And Santana Wilson is a lot closer to On3's ranking than he is to 24/7 ESPN and Rivals ranking. Now, Eric Naleen, who works for On3 on Inside Texas, said that he at times doesn't agree with On3's rankings, but he thinks that they hit this one out of the park. And he thinks there's no way that Santana Wilson is the 35th, 46th, or 46th best corner in the country. So like I said, hopefully for our sake, he's a lot closer to On3's ranking, and he's really productive this year and at the University of Texas. And what I love about this player is the size, right? You're bringing in a lot of corners, and Ryan Watts, Terrence Brooks, Malik Muhammad, and now Santana Wilson, who are legit 6 foot. And I think when you're covering those bigger receivers on the outside, you need a corner that can somewhat match them physically as well. And I think Santana Wilson does that. NFL bloodlines, we talked about, bringing in Arch Manning, who's been under Archie, Eli, and Peyton. You talked about bringing in Santana Wilson, who's been under Adrian Wilson, right? And you also brought in Terrence Brooks, whose father played in the NFL. Those NFL bloodlines can only benefit a young player like Terrence Brooks, Santana Wilson, and Arch Manning, and man coverage, right? I think being able to cover in man and play man coverage consistently just helps your defense so much. It helps the pass rush. It helps everybody else. And when you look at the best teams, the best defenses, right, they're in man coverage. That's what they lean on. Those Patriots defenses, they play man, right? Kirby Smart's Georgia defenses, they play man. Nick Saban's Alabama defenses, they play man. Our defense was a lot better last year because we played a lot more man coverage. And bringing in somebody like Santana Wilson gives you the ability to continue doing that at the 40 acres. So I really love the player. I love the bloodline. I love everything about him. Looking forward to him producing at the University of Texas. Freddie Dubose Jr. was the second commit of the weekend. 6'1", 170-pound receiver from Spring Branch, Texas, 189th player in the country in the 24/7 Sports Composite. In 2021, as a sophomore, he was in shirts, I believe. He caught 24 passes for 423 yards and 2 touchdowns. As a sophomore receiver in 2022, he transferred, then unfortunately tore his ACL in the 4th quarter in his first game. So we didn't get to see a lot of production last year from him high school football-wise because of that ACL. Hopefully he can recover fully and have a dominant 2023 season before he heads to the 40 acres. And when you look at his track regimen as well, right? He has a really good history in track. So he ran a 22.28 200 in April 2022, and he also qualified for state in the triple jump. So he's just a very explosive athlete. And what I love about Freddie Dubose is he tore his ACL in, I guess it would have either been late August, early September 2022. In March, he was participating in the Under Armour Dallas Regional Camp where he said he was 75%. And also, this track season qualified for the 400 and 4x400 at the state level. This is all since tearing his ACL in the fall. So where a lot of players would have just packed it in and focused on their recovery for their senior year, and there's nothing you really would have been able to say about that. That probably would have been the right move. He's out here competing in camps and competing in track, not being fully recovered on a torn ACL, right? Now, somebody's probably listening to this and saying, why are you praising that? That's crazy. But to me, that shows a certain level of grit, right? It shows a certain level of competitiveness that if I can go out there, if I can perform, and if I can help, my team, or if I can go out there and compete, that's what I'm going to do. And so that seems to be the makeup of a player like Freddie Dubose Jr. And I think that's going to benefit him at the University of Texas, somebody that's going to come in and be very explosive in Steve Sarkisian's offenses. He has good height at 6'1" with frame to add more weight. He's 170 right now. If he could get up to 185, 190, he could be a really explosive player if he can keep that speed, that track speed that he has while gaining weight. And he's explosive with the ball in his hands and versatile, somebody that has made an impact in the return game, the rushing game, and of course the receiving game in high school. And then you couple that with track speed and the ability to make people miss, and you're looking at somebody who's a perfect fit in Steve Sarkisian's system and somebody who next to, Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore can be really explosive at the 40 acres. So I love these two commits from the University of Texas, Steve Sarkisian and their staff, bringing in Santana Wilson and Freddie Dubose Jr. They are not done, which we'll talk about next. We'll have a lot more players committing over the next few months, but this was a great start and a great result to a great official visit weekend on the 40 acres. A quick word from our sponsors, and we're going to talk about what the future of this 2024 class can look like as players get closer to making their decisions. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to join today. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission. All right, so we're talking about what's next. Texas currently has the 56th ranked recruiting class. I was being a little facetious in the cold open when I said they are on their way to bringing in the best recruiting class of all time. But I do think that, we spent time talking about were they too slow in recruiting, being the 65th ranked recruiting class. Now they're 56th. I think when they bring in some commits that look like they're headed to the University of Texas, we'll be right back in that top 15, top 10, and hopefully top 5 conversation this year. Although I don't know how many players they'll bring in this class when you brought in 28, I believe, in 2022 and then 22 last year. This one might be 18 to 21, which would affect your recruiting rankings because it goes by overall player score. So then you would have to look at the average to kind of judge this class more so than the overall player score. But it's whatever, right? We know it's going to be a good recruiting class. We know that's what Steve Sarkisian does. He did it with his last recruiting class at USC, which was #2 in the nation. And he's brought in top 5 recruiting classes in back-to-back years at the 40 acres. Hopefully this 2024 class can match that. So when we're looking at it, we'll go by position for the most important positions and targets in this 2024 recruiting class compared to the Texas football team. So when you look at quarterback, they already have their quarterback for 2024 and 2025 in Trey Owens. When you look at running back, Tashard Choice has targeted 2 running backs in this class, Christian Clark out of Arizona and Jarrett Gibson out of Florida. And most people believe that both will end up on the 40 acres. Jarrett Gibson, the 39th player overall in the 24/7 composite. Christian Clark, the 287th player overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite. I talked to Texas Homer a lot in our group chat. He says Christian Clark is his favorite running back in this class. He has no idea how he is the 287th player in this class, according to 24/7 Sports Composite. Texas Homer, somebody who has forgotten more football than I'll ever know. So when he says that, I really trust him. I think Christian Clark is going to be really good. And I think bringing in both of these players is going to be really good for Tashard Choice. And you would have them in 2024 behind Cedric Baxter, giving you one of the best running back rooms in the country heading into the SEC. Love that move. At receiver, you bring in, love those moves if they both commit to the University of Texas. But I think at worst case, you get one of them, right? They're trying to get both. Most people think they'll get both, but I think worst case, you get at least one of those players. You still have a really strong running back room heading into 2024. And that's not even mentioning Jaden Blue, who still might be here next year as well. At receiver, you brought in Freddie Dubose. I think that was really good. Also, Parker Livingstone is set to announce on July 1st, the 4-star receiver out of Texas, 295th overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite. Most people believe that he will commit to the Texas Longhorns on July 1st. So if that happens, you would have Parker Livingstone and Freddie Dubose Jr. in this class as 2 very talented receivers while continuing to recruit 2 5-stars at the top of the class in Micah Hudson and Ryan Wingo. In terms of the offensive line, I really love Brandon Baker, the top offensive tackle in the country. He was on the 40 acres this weekend. Of course, if you're the top offensive lineman in the country, you got to come see Kyle Flood at some point. He did that this weekend, Brandon Baker from California, and he had a really good visit. Everybody is saying that Texas may have made some ground with Brandon Baker this weekend. Not to say that Texas is the favorite, not to say that he'll end up at Texas, but definitely Texas is in better standing than they were prior to the visit. And what I love about Brandon Baker is you would bring him in and he would be able to come in and learn under Kelvin Banks, right? Because Brandon Baker's true freshman year would be Kelvin Banks' last year, presumably at the 40 acres before he heads to the NFL as a first-round draft pick, right? So he could come in as a true freshman and be your swing tackle. I think he would be talented enough to do that as a true freshman, and then start the next 2 years in the SEC. That would give you 5 straight years of elite left tackle play at the University of Texas if you were able to follow Kelvin Banks with Brandon Baker. I think this is a huge recruitment that they need to try to close on. Texas is in his top 10, but it's also a top 10. He is from California. So, it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But I think if Texas could bring in Brandon Baker, like I said, that gives you the possibility of 5 straight years of elite left tackle play, which is crazy at the University of Texas. When we go to the edge position, the defensive line, one player that seems like a Texas lean at this point, Danny Okoye from Tulsa, Oklahoma, 159th overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite. He has long been rumored as a Texas lean, and it feels like Texas took another step in him being a lean this week while he was on campus. So, he doesn't seem like he'll be making a decision until October or November. In that case, anything can happen with that recruitment. But for him to be from Oklahoma and Texas to be, a strong favorite as long as they've been, I think is a really good sign. And, I think Texas has really prioritized him in their recruitment. They said that David Bender spent all weekend with them. They've talked with him about how they want to use him at the 40 acres. And I think he just has a really good relationship with the staff and, has faith in what Texas is building. So, regardless if he waits till October or November, whenever he commits, I'd be surprised if he doesn't end up at the 40 acres. Now, you're going to bring in Danny Okoye, but your number one target, I think, period, but definitely on the edge is going to be Colin Simmons. And, like I mentioned, Danny Okoye is a really good player, 159th, in the 24/7 Sports Composite. But Colin Simmons is the type of player that's a difference maker on the edge, right? When you look at Will Anderson, he dominated in college football, but that was no surprise because Will Anderson was the 5th overall player in his recruiting class, right? Colin Simmons is the 4th or 5th overall player in his recruiting class. He is the type of player that you bring in on the defensive end and he changes life for you in a conference like the SEC. I mean, look at Harold Perkins. He came in already as one of the best edge rushers in the country. Same thing with Will Anderson. Same thing with Dallas Turner. To me, it's just a huge difference when you're recruiting a top 15 player at that position to a top 200 player at that position. So you bring in Colin Simmons and he's a difference maker on the edge. I think we have some really good players right now. But Colin Simmons, that's a 10-sack plus type of player at the 40 acres if you can bring him in. But Danny Okoye, a really good player as well. At the safety position, Miles Davis, 337 in the 24/7 Sports Composite, looks to be deciding in late August. Wilt Fong got the Fong bomb. Believes he is heading to Texas. He told 24/7 Sports and Steve Wiltfong that Texas is leading right now. So I guess by definition, he would be a Texas lean. Hopefully that stays consistent until late August for Miles Davis heading to the 40 acres. And for defensive back, we already talked about continuing to recruit Micah Hudson and Ryan Wingo as 5 stars. You're going to continue to recruit Brandon Baker as a 5-star offensive tackle, and then Colin Simmons as a 5-star edge, and then Kobe Black, the number 1 corner in Texas, the 3rd overall corner in the country, I believe, a 5-star player. He is down to Texas and LSU, it seems. I don't think he's released the top 2 schools, but it feels like it's a Texas or LSU battle. So you're going to continue to recruit him through the whistle as well, right? That's a player essentially in your backyard in Waco that you want to bring in and, be a top corner for you when you head to the SEC, and definitely a player you don't want to lose to the SEC. I mean, to LSU, in the SEC, kind of like, not Jalen Gilbo. What was his name? Javian Toviano last year, right? So you don't want to lose Kobe Black in that same breath to LSU as well, a really talented player that you want to keep in the state of Texas in your backyard. So, like I said, we went from the 65th ranked recruiting class to the 56th ranked recruiting class. I think over the next few weeks, you'll see Texas bring in some more recruitments, and that number will continue to improve. And when it's all said and done, this will be another solid recruiting class from Steve Sarkisian and his staff. So a really good weekend on the 40 acres. Looking forward to see who all will be visiting this next weekend and if we can pile up a few more commitments on the way. A quick word from our sponsors, and we're going to talk about basketball recruiting. Rodney Terry may be bringing in another 4-star to this year's roster to compete at the University of Texas. So we know that Rodney Terry has done a really good job after losing, players to Australia, the G League, the NBA draft eligibility, and the transfer portal, right? He's gotten hit all across the head in different ways in terms of basketball recruiting. He has done a really good job of fortifying this roster since then. And in my opinion, this looks like a roster that will compete with the best of the best in the Big 12. It looks like a roster that'll be a preseason top 15 to top 20 team and should be a team that can compete to get to the Sweet 16 or further this year in the NCAA tournament. I'm really excited about this team, and I'm really excited for the opportunity for Rodney Terry because we've talked about how, he was really good in his 3-month job interview at the 40 acres, right? He exceeded expectations and took a team that experienced turmoil in December to the Elite 8. and had a 13-point lead. This pains me to say, but I had a 13-point lead in the second half en route to a Final Four appearance, right? That was what he almost pulled off as the interim head coach at the University of Texas last year. But like I've said, he deserved the job. There's no debate about that, right? But now I think he needs to earn the job, right? And prove that he was the right person for the job. Because like I said, and as I've said in the past, a 53% career winning percentage at UTEP and Fresno State is not enough to get it done. And I think Ronnie Terry knows that at the University of Texas, and he's not shying away from that. He knows that he has to win to stay the head coach at the University of Texas. Shaka Smart, granted, he didn't win in the NCAA tournament, but he wasn't bad as a coach. He just couldn't get us over the hump, right? And that's not acceptable at the University of Texas. So Ronnie Terry knows that, and I think he relishes the opportunity to show that he should be the face of this basketball program moving forward. And it looks like he may get a big lift, right? We've talked ad nauseum when he lost A.J. Johnson and Ron Holland about Ronnie Terry not having a single recruit on this roster from the 2023 class. But that looks like this could change in the near future. And what I love from this move is that it's an in-conference move that could shift the balance of power a little bit, because Kansas took Arterio Morris from the University of Texas. So what if the University of Texas took a very talented combo guard from the University of Kansas? That looks like it may potentially happen. 2023 guard Chris Johnson from Montverde Academy. If that sounds familiar, that's because that is where Dylan Mitchell went. 4-star out of Missouri City, Texas. He formerly was at Elkins before going to Montverde Academy his senior year. For my fun fact people, Travis Scott went to Elkins High School here in Missouri City. That's just for my fun fact people, right? In case you needed a nugget on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. But he requested to be released from his NLI at Kansas. I'm not sure if that's because they brought in Arterio Morris, if that's because DeJuan Harris stayed. Not sure what the situation is, but Kansas does look like they have a loaded roster. And so Chris Johnson, 2023 guard, 4-star, requested to be released from his NLI. He was, and now he is not headed to Australia or the G League, thankfully for Texas. He wants to go to college and play college basketball. And it seems this would be a 3-team race right now between Texas, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. 6'4", 180, as described by On3, with point guard skills, somebody that can do a little bit of everything at that guard spot. And I've seen multiple times from multiple different sources that he seems to be leaning Texas. And that's no surprise, because he has been mentored his whole life by none other than TJ Ford, right? He is from the Houston area. I mentioned Chris Johnson being from Missouri City, and TJ Ford, his whole life, Chris Johnson's whole life, has been a mentor to him. And obviously he's in his ear telling him to come to the University of Texas and continue, to be around TJ Ford. And he's a Texas boy at the end of the day. So, I think it'll come down to Texas and Texas A&M. And I think Texas has a significant leg up on A&M and Arkansas right now in that recruitment. So that would give Texas, one, a player in the 2023 class for the people that care where the players come from. Two, that gives you a player that would be coming off the bench this year, so likely would be another player that you could return as a starter next year, next to Kendall Weaver, right? I don't see a scenario in which he plays so well off the bench this year as a true freshman that he ends up going to the NBA or transfers, right? So you're looking at a player that may give you 2 years of production at the 40 acres. And now when I look at the roster, if he does commit to the University of Texas, and that's his Texas, and that's an if, right? Because he could end up going to A&M and Arkansas, and this would completely change. But if he does end up at the University of Texas, which I think he will, all signs seem to be pointing to that, you now have a 9-man rotation, right? You had a 9-man rotation last year. It's hard to play 10 players at any level of basketball, especially in college basketball, where you're going from 48 minutes in the NBA to 40 minutes in college basketball. It's just hard to play 10 players, right? And give them significant minutes or a significant role. So these would be your 9 players in your 9-man rotation right now, similar to the 9-man rotation you had last year. Max Amos at point guard, Tyrese Hunter, Dylan Mitchell, Dylan Dessou, and Caden Shedrick as your starters, with Zarik Onyema, Kendall Weaver, Chris Johnson, 2023 guard, 4-star, true freshman, and Brock Cunningham coming off the bench. You could still add another guard, another wing player in the transfer portal, but I think you have a solid 9-man rotation right there. So all offseason, we've talked about Rodney Terry having to build this roster, having to dip into the transfer portal and find players, not knowing who would play for the University of Texas in 2023. And right now, it would seem that all of that was for naught, because it looks like if Chris Johnson commits to the University of Texas, Texas has a 9-man rotation, a very strong 9-man rotation that will compete for a Big 12 championship and will compete hopefully past the Sweet 16 and beyond in 2023. 2023. The Texas Longhorns, period, are recruiting at a high level. Steve Sarkisian and his staff doing a good job in football recruiting with these official visit weekends. And Ronnie Terry quietly has been all over the country recruiting. There also are 2 recruits on campus this week, one for 2024 and one for 2025, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the week. So Ronnie Terry has not slept since he got the job, and I think we'll start to see the fruits of his labor when the season starts later on this year. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.